Hello and welcome to BlenderTutor.com. My name is Tom Latvies and this is the 5th tutorial in the Blender Bootcamp Series. In this tutorial we're going to go over texturing basics in Blender. So let's get started. Okay, so this is a little exercise we're going to do in texturing, and then right here this will be the finished product of this tutorial. So let's get into Blender. Okay, so I'll go open the last tutorial that we did yesterday. I believe it was this one. Yeah, here we go. So I'll just join that, and I'm going to save this as a new project. And if you've been following along, just use your Blender project, but if not, I will include this file on the tutorial on the website. Okay, so before we get into it, I just want to discuss basically what texturing is and how you go about it. Basically, texturing is just the act of taking 2D images and applying them to a 3D model. And it's kind of similar to if you're trying to wrap a present or something, or I'd say that's probably good. So basically, when you take a flat piece of paper and try to wrap something like a mug right here, it's not going to fit perfectly all over. There's going to be wrinkles. There's going to be, stretching or ripping happening. So what you're going to have to do is cut it into pieces and lay it flat on the mug so that it lays flat on it, or else you'll get stretching, or it won't look very good. So what you actually end up doing with 3D models and texturing is when we go into edit mode, you could actually mark areas on the model that will basically cut the image into different pieces so it applies flatly to the model. So in this instance, what we do is add something called a seam. So what I'm going to do is take this top edge loop up here, and if I hit Control E, I could go to mark seam right here, and now you can see those are all red, and I'm going to do that at the bottom of this mug as well. Oh, here, let me turn on my screencast keys. Okay, so once again, to select those, I'm hitting Alt right click and it'll select the edge loop. Control E, mark seam. And then lastly, you're gonna also, so basically what I'm doing is taking the flat part of this mug around it and cutting that out. Now, so I've cut off the top and the bottom into different sections. Now the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this up top, so when you stretch it out, it's basically going to be a one long rectangle that wraps around the cup. So let's see, and I'm actually going to let it go all the way around like that. Control E, mark seam. Okay, so first what I'll do is I'm going to select all of those. I got into this face mode by hitting Control Tab, and it will bring up this little mesh select. So I just select my faces. Now if I hit Alt, and then if I hold down Shift while hitting Alt, I could add all of these in one selection. Now the next thing we're going to do is basically unwrap the model so that this lays out flat. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to actually create a new window right here. I'm going to go into UV image editor, and what we're going to do is we're going to do that exercise that you just saw at the beginning, where it's going to have all the tile pattern on it. So we're going to create a new pattern right here. We'll just call it UV texture, and in the generated type we'll select UV grid, hit OK. and now it's just going to generate this grid for you. Now over here, if I hit U, it's going to give me my unwrapping tools. For this, well, let's look at just what unwrap does. And as you can see, it unwrapped it like that, but it's making everything curved. So let's look at that, what that looks like at first. So now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to go into my node editor and look at my material for my mug. And I'm actually, because I want to keep this ceramic material, so I'm going to create a new one. Well, here, let's select that, turn it off, and just create a UV grid material. And now it'll just be a diffuse material, and we'll add a texture to it, image texture. Connect those. So the texture will now be telling what color the diffuse will be. And right here, you could either open a texture outside of Blender, or since we created this inside of Blender, I could go to UV texture. And now if I were to look at this rendered, oh, you know what? So when Blender can't find the material that, or the texture that you're looking for, it defaults to this pink purple color. So let's turn off rendering real quick. And what I'm going to have to do is I have to either save this texture that we created externally. So I usually do save as image, and in my well, let's go into my texturing project, and then I have a texture folder, and I've already created a UV grid, but I'll save this one as an example, so we'll call that 2. And now I could go find that externally. The other thing I could do though is, since I created this in here, I could pack image, which will basically save this image in the blend file. So now I believe this should work now. There we go. So as you can see, I have my texture on there, which is nice, but it's not very straight. It's kind of at an angle. So I could actually make it look a little cleaner if I were to. I'm going to go from a front view and orthographic view by hitting 5 on the keyboard. And we'll go back into edit mode. If I hit unwrap again, I could do cylinder projection. And it lays out the UVs in a much straighter fashion, but let's see how this looks. I'm going to scale that down, make it look similar to how it should. I don't think this is what I wanted either. Yeah, that's going to stretch it as well. Okay, so I see what I was doing wrong. Basically what I had to do was, let me go back to vertex. Originally the bottom of my mug on the inside and the outside was just one giant face. What I did was I just took, here, look at it like this. I just took this interior face, extruded inwards, just scaling it down. You can't see it right now, but that's basically what this one is right here, is just a scaled down interface. So it just added this new edge loop of faces right here. Okay, so now that I fixed that interface, and I also did that on the bottom of the mug. Once I did that, now if I'm basically going to select all of the mug itself, not the handle, and I'm going to turn off these faces down here. I could just deselect those like that. Now if I look in the side view and I unwrap with cylinder projection, it's gonna project it like that, which all of my lines are perfectly straight. I'm just gonna have to scale it down on the Z so they're roughly the same size as they are on here. Now if we look in texture mode, I could actually just adjust it like that until I'm happy with how those look. Come on. So it's looking okay. And then for the center faces, I'll select those. Now I'm going to go to face mode and select them. And I will just project from view for those. And now I might just scale those down a little so they match. There we go. And then as far as the handle goes, since the both ends are already open, all we're gonna have to do is add one edge loop cut, or one seam down the middle. So I'll just mark seam, select all those by hitting L, and I'll unwrap. And that'll be a little weird, but that's actually it's gonna be okay for us. And I could just adjust the size that I want to match, but that's basically how I do that. As far as the plates go, I'll go back to the UV texture, and with that I can literally just go from the top view. I don't even have to do any unwrapping with this. I'll just unwrap, or I could project from view as well, and then just scale it up or down until I'm happy with the size. And I basically do that with everything. As far as this goes, once again, I just outline and cut up all of these. For the big mug, you could do the cylinder, or you could do a sphere project for that, which, let's look at that real quick, because this is almost like a giant ball. So we'll do that. Mark seam. And once again, I think we're going to want to extrude and scale that down just so it has a proper interface. And now I will also add a seam right there. And I'm actually going to turn off, well, I could do it like this. Okay. We will give this UV grid as well. Go into texture view. I'll unwrap that. We could do cylinder, or I might even try sphere. Texture. Oh, you know, I selected the wrong one. We're going to want that to be UV as well. There we go. And now I might scale this along the X a little to make it look more square, less stretched out. Cool. And I did the same for this top part, the handle, and the table as well. So I would practice with that. Just to basically, what you're going to want to do is get your objects looking to a point where none of the squares look stretched out or squished down. You want pretty much all of the squares to be evenly sized and spaced throughout your entire model. Obviously, when you have a little seam, like let's look at the back here. Actually, can't really see the seam. That's not a bad job. Maybe in here. No, those are all looking pretty okay. Sometimes you're going to see a seam when you do have the seam right there where like the textures meet and you could see a obvious line. You're just going to do your best to hide that. Maybe do it in the back of the model where the camera won't be facing it. Like down here you could see the line right there where the texture doesn't exactly meet up. That's fine. You will want to still have it stretched out so all of the texture is pretty even though size-wise. So I'm going to go back to all of the original materials. So For this, I'm going to go back to glass. For this one, I believe it was plastic. For this, I'll go to ceramic. I'll go to plate. Cool. Now let's just check out how that looks. Okay, so we're back to normal now. Save that. So now we will start actually texturing for real. I'm gonna turn on my subsurf again. Okay, so let's start with the table. So what we'll do is pretty much same as before. I'm gonna select the edge loop. I'm gonna mark seam on the top and the bottom of the table, and then also down one of the sides that you won't see on the won't see in the camera view. So select that, mark seam, and now I can, let's see what happens if I just unwrap that. That's actually fine. So I've done that. I could actually go to UVs, pack islands, so it'll get everything approximately the same size. And I actually don't want this texture though. And what I'm going to do is open up a texture that I got from outside of Blender. I got some wood textures and some brick textures for the back wall. I use a website called cgtextures.com. I would highly recommend you checking it out. It has thousands of really, high quality textures they could use. It does have a free membership for the lower resolution textures. So if we were to go check this out, I'm looking modern small. I think this is where I was getting them from the brown category. So if you look in here, it's actually going to ask you to log in for a free account where you get 15 megabyte account. You can only select the small option. If you pay for an account though, I'm not sure how much it is, but I know I have one. You pay about $70 or $80, I believe, for a year, and you can download up to 100 megabytes a day worth of textures at the highest resolution they come, which some of them are quite large. You could also see they have tiled textures. It's a very useful resource. Anyway, this is where I got my textures from. I'll link to it on the site. So I'm going to go and open up my texture. So I used this one. And, oh, what am I doing? Do I want brick on the table? Here's my wood texture. So I'm going to go ahead and unwrap that again. Alright, so I'm going to just have to scale that up so they're back to circles. And what we could do is go in here. I'm going to add a texture into my material. Image texture, connect that. And I'll just open up the wood fine that I selected. Now if we look at this in texture view, you could see, ooh, that's not looking very pretty. Okay, so I fixed that. What I had to do was, I basically had the same problem that I had when I was texturing my mug. I had to extrude in just one set of faces, and then I also moved my seam from the very outer edge to this inner one that I created, and that evenly spaced out everything so it wasn't stretching the texture. So now if I select all of this, hit unwrap, it's going to give me this. I'm going to scale this so they look like circles. And now basically I'm just going to, well, here, we'll just select this one, scale it up so I could have a pretty nice large texture on that table. And yeah, that's looking okay. And now if we look at it, let's see how it looks rendered. Looks okay, but even though the wood would technically have, some bumps in it. It wouldn't be perfectly flat. It's getting just kind of straight reflections right now. What we want is to give it a little bumpiness to it so it looks like it's actually 3D and not just a flat image texture. So to do that, we'll go into our material again, and you could really just take this and here, we'll take our texture and stick it in displacement. And now if we look at it rendered, you can see it's got some bumpiness to it now. Here. Seeing the reflection there, you can see it's got night. You can see basically all the 3D lines of the wood, whereas before, if I take that away, it's just perfectly flat. So if we add that to that, it's basically right now taking it at full strength bump, which this would actually be a little too much. What I would recommend is in your material node setup, you go to color, select mix node. You could take your texture, stick it, I believe, in the bottom one, and then take this, put it in displacement, change the mix type to multiply, and then whatever this is set to is going to be what it multiplies it by. So if you want it just half strength, you do 0.5, you do 0.2. Let me make sure this is correct. There's our bump. So I have it at 0.2 right now. That's looking okay. So I'm going to keep that there. And now our table, I mean, everything in view is already textured, so we'll call that okay. With our wall right here, there's a number of ways we could do this actually. I'm going to close this texture out. I could unwrap just this wall because it's just a square. And then I could open up my brick texture, which I already brought in. And since it's already a square, it's going to line up perfectly. So now if I were to put it in my image texture, select brick, go into texture view. There we go. We've already got that set up for us. But another way we could do this, and in this particular instance it's not so useful since it's such a simple object, it's just a plane, but say if you want to do an outdoor scene and you want a sky image in the background and you want to bring it in from outside of Blender, but it's a rectangle and you're gonna unwrap it, and you're gonna have to basically size up the UV coordinates until it looks perfect in your view. There's actually a much easier way to do that. You could import the image at the exact aspect ratio that it is as an image. It's actually using an add-on that's built into Blender. If you go into File, User Preferences, and you go into, I believe, Import Export, scroll down here, and there's this Import Images as Planes. One moment. Sorry about that. So yeah, you have this import images as planes. I already have it on, so basically what you're going to do is in your 3D view, go to Mesh, Images as Planes, and you're going to go and select the texture that you want. So the textures, you could actually look at these like this. I want that one. And then you could select the options right here, what type of material it'll get it, because it'll create a new material. So I want to use the image dimensions, and I want it as a diffuse, so that'll be good. And I hit import image as plane, and now you can see it brought it in. It's very tiny. Well, look at that texture view. But there you go. So now if I rotate that on the X by 90, scale it up, and we've got another brick wall right there. I'll actually delete that for now, but that's a very useful tool, especially for exterior scenes. And now for my brick, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a color mix node. Bring that over here. It'll be in the top one. And I'll put that in the displacement. I'll keep it at 0.5 for now actually. And let's look at that. Okay. Let me just see some light coming off this. I think it's getting a little bump, yeah. And, you know, now that I look at this plastic material, I can see it's a little too shiny. I'm going to maybe change that to 0.3. No, actually I want it to go down, so 0.1. There we go, that looks better. And that is about it. Let's look at that. Cool. So when I added my little decal here, the Blender Tutor logo, I just cut that out separately, and I just, same as we've been doing with everything else, put a little UV cutout right there, and I applied it onto my mug. And you know, it's very easy to just watch it in texture view so you can see exactly where it'll be placed. So I'm going to call that a tutorial. The next tutorial we'll do will be lighting basics, and we're going to light this scene so it looks a little nicer. So see you in that one. Thanks.